So there are technically 4 new teams for this upcoming UFL season. Let's dive into all of their rosters and kind of see what my thoughts are on these teams. We're going to begin with the Columbus Aviators being head coached by Ted Ginn Jr. This is the team that was technically the Michigan Panthers of last year. It does suck to see the Panthers leave after the great season they just had, being the runners up in the UFL Championship, but it does also hurt a bit more to see what they were not able to retain in Columbus. To start, league MVP Bryce Perkins went back to the NFL, while backup Danny Edling got a coaching job with the Atlanta Falcons. Meanwhile, third string Rocky Lombardi does not make the trip to Columbus. It doesn't even seem like he's on a UFL team, so his professional football journey is going to be taking him elsewhere. Instead, they brought in Jalen McClellan and Jalen Morton to compete for the QB1 job. Both of those guys can do a pretty fine job, especially Jalen McClellan. He played pretty well with Houston last year in the UFL, so I'm excited to see what he can do in Columbus. 3 running backs also departed from this team, but the one they were able to keep was Toa Tawa. He was a great back last year for the Michigan Panthers. I'm excited to see him back in UFL and see what he can do with the Columbus Aviators this time around. They also brought in John Lovett, who was with the San Antonio Brahmas last year, and Zaquandre White, who was with the Houston Roughnecks last year. They kept receivers Devin Ross and Jalen Moore, but the other 4 main receiver options for them last year are now elsewhere. To replace them, they brought in Kiki Chisholm, who was with the Houston Roughnecks last year, and Tay Martin, who has had stints with the 49ers, Titans, and Commanders. Gunnar Oaks returns as tight end, but Cole Hikutini, who was a really good tight end from them last year, is going to depart, being replaced by Alzaiz Mack, who spent last season with the San Antonio Brahmas. Defense is going to be without Breland Speaks, which is a very tough loss for them. But on the bright side, they do keep Noah Dawkins, who is back in the linebacker room and has been a really solid linebacker for Michigan. Secondary has a massive shakeup with 3 corners and 2 safeties leaving. The good news is DJ Miller is back, who had a standout season last year. They also brought in former Miami Dolphin Cam Smith and former Atlanta Falcon Henry Black, who was also with the San Antonio Brahmas in years past. This is a Columbus team that definitely has the talent to be a really good team this year in the UFL. The roster they inherited is one that made the championship last year, and yes, there are changes. A lot of the guys they brought in to replace the departed are also really solid players, so I'm excited to see what Ted Ginn Jr. can build with this roster. Up next is the Louisville Kings being head coached by Chris Redman. They were the Memphis Showboats last year, and Memphis was a very rough team last season, and they did a complete overhaul to the roster, and it's looking really good on paper. The question is just when it comes to on the field, how will it look? A QB battle between former Kansas Jayhawk Jason Bean, former Cal Golden Bear Chandler Rogers, and former FAU Owl Nikosi Perry is where it's all gonna start. Getting the right QB is gonna be big for this team as they have the skill positions to back it up. A running back room of former Jacksonville Jaguar James Robinson, former Pittsburgh Steeler Benny Snell, and Jaden Sheardon, who was with the Michigan Panthers last season, is a really solid room. Paired with the returning Kwame Lassiter and Jonathan Adams to go with 2 former Arlington Renegades in Isaiah Winstead and Javante Payton. It is a receiver room that has the talent on the roster to make plays when need be. New tight ends in Zach Davison and Trey McKitty are also going to be big upgrades for them compared to what they had last season. Davison was previously with the Vikings, Bills, and Giants, while McKitty was a former 3rd-round pick out of the University of Georgia. The overhaul continues into the defense with multiple new pieces across the board. The only real returning piece is going to be Keaton Ellis, who played well for Memphis the past few seasons, but they also have the additions of Cameron Datzler, Bryce Hall, and Kenny Robinson to help round out the defense. This on paper is a much improved team from what Memphis was last year, and I cannot wait to see how it all comes together on the field. This could very easily be one of the better year-to-year jumps of a team quality we've seen in spring football in quite some time, so I'm very excited to see what Louisville has in store. The third team is the Orlando Storm, being head coached by Anthony Beck. They were the San Antonio Brahmas of last year. Another team that saw their roster get completely overhauled from last season to this year. But it mainly starts with Anthony Beck being brought in to be the head coach. He has done a really solid job with St. Louis the past few seasons. Now the question would just be, can he get over that hump he wasn't able to in St. Louis in a new location? To start, they bring in former Cleveland Brown Dorian Thompson Robinson and former Carolina Panther Jack Plummer to compete for the QB1 job. Two former NFL quarterbacks, the talent would not be a question with them. The real question will be, can they execute this offense on the field as it needs to be? All UFL running back Jay-Sean Corbin returns to the lineup after stints with the Falcons and Patriots in the fall. Elijah Dotson, who went to Northern Colorado, and Trey Stewart, who went to Jacksonville State, are some unproven guys that are going to be able to get a chance with the Storm this season. Marquez Stevenson and D. Anderson are returning receivers for the Storm. They also bring in former Denver Bronco KJ Hamler and all UFL receiver and return man Chris Rowland from DC. Chris Rowland's going to be a great piece for this team. He really did it all for the Defenders last year when they went on to win the UFL championship. So he's going to fit in really nicely with an Anthony Beck coached offense. Tight end Steven Stellanos is also back after a pretty solid season with San Antonio last year. We'll see what he can do in a change of scenery in Orlando, but with still technically the same team. Jacob Sykes and Isaiah Buggs anchored the defensive line for new edge rushers Keyshawn Banks, Chris Garrett, and Jayshawn Davis. All UFL linebacker Devontae Beckett is back to be the leader of this defense, with the secondary being overhauled to include corners Lamar Jackson, Chris Claybrooks, and Alan George, plus safeties Nate Medors and former Oklahoma State Cowboy Jason Taylor II. Orlando very well might be the best coach team of the bunch this season because of Anthony Beck and what he has proven in the spring leagues in the past. The question is just, are they going to be able to get over any type of humps and struggles that they've had? St. Louis really was not fully able to do that with Anthony Beck the past 2 seasons. So in Orlando, is it going to be a different story for Anthony Beck? Or is it still going to be, we made the conference championship, but we could not get any further? The final team isn't a relocated team, but it is a rebranded team, as the Houston Gamblers are next, being head coached by Kevin Smith. Hi, this is me from the future. Quick clarification. It's actually Kevin Sumlin who's head coach in the Houston Gamblers. I don't know how I read it as Kevin Smith. Last year, they were the Houston Roughnecks. Another team that is shaking some things up for this season. They had a really good end of year last year. So how do they improve on that? Nolan Henderson returns to compete with Hunter Deckers and Donovan Smith for QB1. Kirk Merritt is the only returning running back and is going to be sharing reps with former Delaware Blue Hen Marcus Yarns and former Minnesota Golden Gopher Marcus Major. 2 receivers return in Lawrence Keys and Justin Hall, but this room is going to be a bit crowded as Braylon Sanders. Alright, final time I'm jumping in. As I am editing this, Braylon Sanders was just traded back to the DC Defenders, so that's one less piece of this crowded receiver room. John Trey Kirkland and Kay Loxley are brought in from other UFL teams, and they add former UCF Knight Kobe Hudson. It's another case where if I'm able to talk about UCF Knight, I'm going to. He played really well for the Knights, didn't fully get his chance in the NFL, but still someone that can make an impact. The tight end position is moved around quite a bit as well. Armani Rogers and Caleb Bass being paired with the returning Cam Sutton. So a new look tight end room for Houston this season. 2 really high-powered additions to the front 7 were made with Malik Fisher, a former Michigan Panther, and all UFL and UFL champion linebacker Anthony Hines being added to this defense. They added former Memphis Showboat Eli Walker to the secondary to pair with the returning pieces of Keenan Isaac and Markel Roby. This is a really solid defense on paper. They really added a ton of firepower to it. The question is just, when it comes to on the field, how well is it going to perform from there? They're going to be a very interesting team. They have some killer uniforms as well to pair with all this. They're going to look nice while playing games. The question is just, can all these new pieces come together and put in some really solid work on the field? We shall see in a week's time. So there's the first batch of UFL teams to cover. In a few days, we'll cover the final 4 before we get into proper UFL coverage next week with power rankings and predictions. Appreciate everyone tuning in. Subscribe if you're new, is greatly appreciated. And I'll see you all next time. Have yourselves a damn good one. Peace.